Walsh. This series is called Care of the Self. In the last segment, we talked about isolated parts and how they can be at the source of chronic problems. And we talked about how to resolve those problems and get those parts out of isolation. Now, this segment is going to find jobs for those parts once they're out of isolation. Something for them to do, something to, well, direct their energy. Now, I do need to address one critical point. When you find isolated parts, it's best to determine the relative age of the parts. And I just break this into two categories. Parts are either 10 years old or younger or older than that. If parts are younger than 10 years old, then it's important that these parts have chaperones when they join the rest of the system, because these young parts, well, they can get in trouble. It's kind of like if you dropped a bunch of kindergartens off at Safeway and said, "Don't touch anything, I'll be back in an hour." It's going to be trouble. So if I find out that the isolated parts are younger than 10 years old, then I will tell the parts, soon you're going to be joining the rest of the system. You'll be out of isolation, and would you like to have an older part as a guide when you join the rest of the system? A guide that can help you get around the system and provide important information for you. Most of the time, the young parts will say yes, because they don't know what the rest of the system is like. And so then, I will tell them I will see if we can make that possible. And then I will ask the unconscious, are there an equal number, equal to the number of isolated young parts I'm dealing with right now? Are there an equal number of older, meaning at least 15 years old or older? Are there an equal number of older parts that would be willing to chaperone these young parts as they leave isolation and join the rest of the system? Because they will need some assistance and some guidance. Be patient awaiting a response. And if you get a yes, then I will ask the unconscious to please help these older parts get together with the young parts in isolation so they can be escorted out of isolation. And when all these parts are together, that yes finger can lift up. Now, if I get a no to that request for parts, then I will say, are there any older parts that would be willing to chaperone these young parts? Typically there's a yes. I didn't get an equal number, but I got some. And then I'll ask that the unconscious help get these parts together with the young parts in isolation so they can be escorted out of isolation. And when I get that signal that the older parts are with the younger parts, I will say to the young parts, you now have your guides or chaperones, and for some of you, you will be in groups with one chaperone. So follow your chaperone. And then I will suggest that these parts now leave isolation. And I'll ask the yes finger to lift up when all parts are no longer isolated. So this is important. The chaperones are really important because it really offers some security to these young parts and prevents them from getting in trouble. For older parts, they get out of isolation, they celebrate, and then what do? Well, parts typically want and need something to do. They want some purpose or function. And so typically I will say, I've got an idea for an employment agency, and I'm thinking about an employment agency with 3 different divisions. An employment agency within me. The first division of this agency will identify jobs that are available for these parts. The second division of the agency will assign parts to specific jobs. The third division of this employment agency will identify needs that are not being fully met throughout the system, and then develop jobs to meet those needs. And there will also be an orientation class, and all parts getting a new job will need to take the orientation class before they start the new job. The orientation class reviews the entire history of the system, so that parts know what's happening in the present and understand a lot of key dynamics from the past. Now, in the orientation class, parts are able to release, let go of everything they don't need in the present, so they can become free of old, outdated beliefs. They can let go of old emotions and perceptions, and they can let go of old behaviors that are no longer appropriate in the present. So they can let go of all sorts of things, really lighten their load. And that will allow them to be much more fully in the present with whatever job they get. Okay, so if the unconscious agrees that this employment agency is a good idea for the system, then I will ask, will that employment agency now be constructed so that it can take on employees? Typically there's a yes, and then I'll ask the yes finger to lift up when the employment agency is fully constructed. And then I will ask any parts that really want something to do, want some purpose or function, please come to the employment agency, because you can work for the employment agency. You can select one of the 3 divisions to work in, or you, if you're more seasoned, you can be one of the teachers in the orientation class. And the orientation class will need a lot of teachers because it's covering the entire lifespan, parts from every period. So large number of teachers certainly can work for the orientation class. So then I will ask the yes finger to lift up when the employment agency is fully staffed. Once that happens, then I will say, since the employment agency needs to determine the status of needs throughout the system, it does need to be networked throughout the entire system. So will the employment agency now be networked throughout the entire system? Typically there's a yes. Then I'll ask the yes finger to lift up when the employment agency is fully networked throughout the system. Once that happens, then I will suggest that the employment agency now open its doors and provide jobs for parts that need jobs. Now, the system already has many thousands of jobs, just all kinds of different functions happening throughout the system. But I encourage the employment agency to be creative with making new jobs, and it could be addressing anything. Now, I can tell you that the most recent job I added myself was soliciting a team to help me learn Italian. And I asked for a large number of parts because I knew it was a big job. but people I've worked with in the past have talked about things they wanted help with. Someone help focusing attention. And so you can develop a focus job. And there was a teenager I worked with who wanted help with school. And she ended up developing jobs, well, a job for every class. There was a math job and a history job, a science job. Anyway, she ended up doing quite well in school. And she attributed it to these teams that were helping her with different subjects. So you can create jobs, and when you have an idea, something you'd like a little help with, you can just present that idea to the unconscious or to the employment agency and say that you'd like a new job addressing this particular function. So this is a nice way to keep parts busy, because over time you may get many parts out of isolation, and they'll just need something to do and want something to do. So if there is an employment agency in place, that's a wonderful solution. I could say a lot more about different kinds of jobs, but all of that information, or I should say a lot of that information, is in a chapter in the Care of the Self Owner's Manual book. There's a whole chapter on employment agency with lots of examples of different jobs. Okay, so I thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next sequence, and realize that all of the information I'm presenting through this series is available in that book, Care of the Self Owner's Manual. Thank you.